Most folks in the New Mexico territory had heard of Caleb Mercer, though not a single soul could say for sure where he came from. Some swore he'd once worn a deputy's badge until blood on his hands forced him out. Others claimed he rode with outlaws, then turned on them when the killing grew too much. All anyone truly knew was this: wherever Caleb went, scars followed, etched across his face, carved into his silence, and whispered about in the corners of every saloon he passed through. Before we dive in, don't forget to like this video, share it with friends, and make sure you're subscribed for more incredible stories like this one. On that storm-bitten night, when the sky split open with lightning and the wind clawed across the plains, Caleb wasn't looking for shelter. He'd spent years sleeping under trees, in canyons, or against the belly of his horse. But the storm was different. Merciless, cutting, and determined to drive him toward something he'd spent his life avoiding. People. The faint glow of lantern light in the distance pulled him in like a moth. At first, he thought it was a town, maybe a stage stop. But when he drew closer, reins heavy in hand, he saw the outline of a small ranch house, its boards weathered, its windows patched, its porch sagging under the weight of survival. And standing in that doorway, the storm behind him and the storm within him colliding, Caleb Mercer had no idea that the women waiting inside would change the rest of his life. The door creaked open before he even reached the porch. A lantern held high threw a halo of gold around the figure of a woman. Her hair, streaked with gray, was tied back, her eyes sharp as whetted steel. A shotgun rested in her grip like it belonged there, and her stance told Caleb she knew how to use it. "Storm'll pass," she said flatly. "Keep ridin'." Caleb pulled his hat low, rain dripping off its brim. "A mile out there, I'll freeze before it does. I'm not a skin for comfort. Just a dry corner till the sky quits its fury." The woman studied him for a long, hard moment before answering. Behind her, shadows shifted, 3 other figures, all women, each with eyes that seemed carved from stories untold. "I'm Miriam," the woman with the shotgun said at last. "This is our land, our home. We don't let just anyone step inside." Caleb's voice was steady, low. "I'm not just anyone, but I won't be your problem." The tension held like a rope about to snap. Then another voice cut in, sharper, younger. "If he tries anything, we'll gut him where he stands." The speaker stepped into the light. She was tall, broad-shouldered, with hair braided tight against her head and a scar slashing across her collarbone. Her eyes locked on him with the kind of challenge he'd seen on men before a draw. "Eliza," Miriam said in warning, then turned her gaze back to Caleb. "You can stay. One night. But at dawn you work, or you leave." Caleb nodded once. Fair trade. Inside, the cabin was cramped but alive. The scent of beans boiling over the hearth mingled with the smell of damp wood. One woman, quiet, her hair loose and dark, tended the pot, her movements careful, deliberate. She didn't look up when Caleb entered, though he felt her awareness pressing on him all the same. "That's Naomi," Miriam said, setting the shotgun in the corner. The last of the 4 stood near the fire. Young, barely more than 20. Her dark hair tumbled loose, her eyes sparking like coals. She studied him with an intensity that was not suspicion but something fiercer, something that unsettled Caleb more than the storm outside. "And that's Clara," Miriam finished. Clara didn't wait for introductions. She stepped closer, her gaze fixed on the scar that cut across Caleb's face. "A man doesn't get that kind of mark from splitting fence rails." Caleb smirked faintly. "No, he doesn't." "Then what did you do?" Her boldness caught the room still. Even Eliza glanced at Miriam, but Miriam said nothing. Caleb eased himself down by the fire, his coat dripping onto the floorboards. "Things I don't much care to remember. Things you wouldn't care to know." Clara tilted her head, eyes still burning. "Maybe I would." For the first time in a long while, Caleb felt heat rising in his chest that wasn't from the flames. He looked away. Silence pressed heavily, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the storm's fury outside. By morning, Caleb had already taken to the chores. The storm had passed, but the land bore its marks. Fences down, water troughs tipped, cattle restless. He saddled up without being asked, setting posts, tightening wire, hammering with a steady rhythm that carried across the field. From the porch, the widows watched. "He knows work," Naomi said softly, almost with relief. "Work doesn't make him trustworthy," Eliza snapped. "We don't know who he is, what he's run from. Strays carry trouble." But Clara only smiled faintly, her arms folded as she leaned against the porch beam. "Maybe trouble's exactly what we need." Caleb caught her watching him, and when their eyes met, she didn't look away. That night, as the fire burned low, they ate in silence. Naomi's stew warmed their bellies, but it was Clara's voice that stirred the room. "You ride alone," she said, setting her bowl down. "But you won't for long." Caleb frowned. "What makes you so sure?" "Because a man like you doesn't drift forever. You can keep running from ghosts, but one day you'll sit down. Maybe here, maybe with us." The words hit him harder than a bullet. He stared into the flames, saying nothing, but deep down, something shifted. Outside, the coyotes howled. Inside, the widow's eyes lingered on the drifter by their fire. None of them knew yet whether he'd save them or doom them, but all of them knew he was already part of their story. The sun rose over the New Mexico plains like a slow-burning ember, casting long shadows across the battered fences Caleb Mercer had repaired the day before. He was already at work when the widows stepped outside, his shirt sleeves rolled, hammer swinging steady against the dry morning air. Sweat slicked his brow, dust clung to his boots, and yet his movements carried a quiet discipline, like a man who'd been working since before dawn and didn't mind a day with no end. Naomi, holding a pail of water, paused to watch him. "He doesn't waste words," she murmured. Eliza, standing beside her with her arms crossed, scowled. "Words or not, I don't trust him. Men don't drift without a reason." But Clara, leaning against the porch post with her hair loose around her shoulders, smiled with that fire in her eyes. Sometimes a reason is exactly what makes a man worth keeping. Caleb didn't look up, though he felt their gazes on him. He'd lived long enough to know when he was being measured, and for the first time in years, he found himself caring about the verdict. By noon, Caleb had hauled water from the well, patched the roof, and split enough firewood to fill the stack against the cabin wall. When he finally stepped inside, the smell of Naomi's bread filled the small room, mixing with the earthy scent of beans simmering in the pot. Miriam, seated at the table, watched him closely. "You work like a man paying debt." Caleb sat, his voice quiet. "Maybe I am." Miriam's gaze lingered, as though she wanted to ask more, but she didn't. Around here, everyone carried ghosts. They didn't always need naming. It was Clara who broke the silence, sliding a cup toward him. "Drink. You've earned it, husband." The word landed heavy, bold as a shot fired in the night. Eliza's eyes narrowed, Naomi's hands froze on her apron, and Miriam's lips pressed thin. Caleb looked at Clara, his face unreadable. "Don't call me that." "Why not?" Her chin lifted, her tone defiant. "You ride alone, but you eat at our table. You work our land. Tell me what else to call you." His jaw tightened, and for a long moment, the crackle of the hearth was the only sound. Then he set the cup down. "Call me what I am. A drifter. Nothing more." Clara smiled, not a bit deterred. "For now." The next morning, Miriam sent Caleb into town with Eliza. Supplies were running low: flour, nails, lamp oil, and the ranch couldn't run on hard work alone. Caleb saddled his horse in silence, though he felt Eliza's eyes on him the whole time. "You don't talk much," she finally said as they rode. "Talk's cheap," he answered. Eliza snorted. "Is that so? You'll need more than silence when the town starts asking questions. They don't take kindly to strangers, especially strangers who ride with widows." Caleb's hand brushed the scar on his jaw. "Let them ask." The town of Dry Creek was little more than a cluster of wooden buildings baking under the sun, but it held enough eyes to make Caleb's skin prickle. As he and Eliza tied their horses outside the general store, whispers already stirred. A drifter, scarred and silent, walking side by side with a widow. That was fuel enough for a dozen rumors. Inside the store, the shopkeeper's smile was thin. Eliza, thought you'd given up on this place. Not yet, she said briskly, listing what they needed. Caleb felt the stares. A group of men at the counter eyed him, smirking. One spat into the spittoon and leaned close enough for his words to cut. Don't look like much of a man, he drawled. Ridin' with womenfolk. Or maybe that's all you're good for. The room went still. Eliza stiffened, her hand twitching near the knife at her belt. Caleb didn't move. He simply turned, meeting the man's eyes with a calm that felt colder than steel. You got something worth saying, Caleb said, voice low. Say it outside. The man faltered, his smirk twitching. Caleb didn't need to raise his voice. The scar, the silence, the weight of his presence did all the work. After a tense beat, the man looked away. Eliza exhaled slowly. Maybe you're not just a drifter after all. Back at the ranch, the widows listened as Eliza recounted the story. Naomi looked troubled, Miriam unreadable. But Clara leaned forward, her eyes glowing. You stood your ground, she said softly, like a man who knows where he belongs. Caleb shook his head. I don't belong anywhere. Best you remember that. But even as he spoke the words, he felt their hollowness. That night, the fire burned low, shadows dancing along the walls. Caleb sat alone at first, mending a saddle strap, but one by one the widows joined him. Naomi brought her sewing, Eliza sharpened a knife, Miriam rocked quietly with a book in her lap, and Clara sat nearest, her gaze fixed on him with that unshakable boldness. Have you ever thought about stopping? She asked suddenly. Caleb didn't look up. Stopping what? Riding, drifting, running. His hands stilled on the leather strap. For a moment the silence pressed heavily. Then he said, every day. But thinking doesn't change the road. Clara leaned closer, her voice softer now. Maybe it's not the road that needs changing. Maybe it's the man. Caleb finally met her eyes, the firelight reflecting in their depths. There was no fear in her gaze, no hesitation. Just fire, young and wild. He wanted to tell her she was wrong, that a man like him carried too much blood, too many ghosts. But the words caught in his throat. Instead, he stood, tossing the strap aside. It's late. Get some sleep. Clara's smile lingered as she watched him walk away. Good night, husband. The word burned through the cabin long after the fire had died. The days that followed were restless. Caleb Mercer worked harder than ever, mending fences, hauling water, keeping watch when the nights grew too quiet. Yet the weight pressing on him wasn't just the chores. It was the whispers in town, the sneers, the sidelong glances. He knew men like that, prideful, bitter, small. The kind who couldn't stand to see four widows and a scarred drifter making do without their help. Something was coming. Caleb felt it in his bones. Miriam felt it too. She said little, but her eyes lingered longer on the horizon, and her hand brushed the shotgun more often than before. Eliza sharpened her knives with a grim rhythm. Naomi prayed softly in the evenings, her voice barely more than a whisper. And Clara burned brighter than ever, her fire undimmed, though Caleb sometimes caught a flicker of worry behind her smile. One night, as the coyotes yelped in the distance, Clara sat close by the fire, leaning in until Caleb could feel her warmth. You're waiting for the storm, she said. Caleb looked into the flames. Storm always comes. And when it does? He met her gaze, steady, unflinching. I'll be ready. The storm broke 3 nights later. It began with the sound of hooves, distant, faint, then growing louder, beating against the dry earth like war drums. The widows froze, eyes darting toward the windows. Caleb rose slowly, the motion deliberate, calm. They're coming, Miriam said flatly. Eliza already had her rifle in hand, her jaw set tight. Told you his kind drags trouble. Caleb didn't answer. He strapped on his gun belt, the leather creaking, the iron heavy against his hip. The widow's eyes followed every motion. Outside, voices carried on the wind, jeering, mocking. Men half-drunk and full of cruelty. A dozen, maybe more. Caleb stepped onto the porch, the night air cold against his skin. A rider spurred forward, his grin catching the moonlight. It was the deputy from town, the same one who'd sneered in the general store. "Mercer," he called. "Heard you been playing house out here. Thought we'd pay a visit. Remind these ladies where they belong." Laughter rippled through the men behind him. Caleb's voice cut through the night, calm as a blade unsheathed. "Turn around. Leave now, and you won't bleed for it." The deputy's grin widened. "You talk big for a man hiding behind women." Eliza's voice rang sharp from the doorway. "Ain't no man hiding here." She leveled her rifle, the barrel gleaming. The deputy spat. "Fine. Have it your way." He raised his hand. The riders surged forward. Gunfire tore the night open. The widows fired from the doorway and windows, sparks lighting the dark. Caleb moved with deadly precision, calm, measured, every shot deliberate. Men screamed, horses reared, dust and smoke choked the air. Clara reloaded frantically, her hands trembling, but her eyes never left Caleb. She saw the way he moved, like a man who'd lived his whole life in battle, each motion honed by loss and survival. The deputy charged forward, firing wildly. A bullet grazed Caleb's arm, tearing fabric and flesh, but he didn't flinch. He stepped into the open, steady, and when the deputy raised his gun again, Caleb's shot cracked through the chaos, swift, final. The deputy tumbled from his saddle, the dust swallowing him. The remaining riders faltered, their courage crumbling. One by one, they turned tail, spurring their horses into the dark, leaving only silence and the smell of gunpowder behind. Inside, the cabin was thick with smoke and breathless relief. Naomi whispered thanks under her breath, her hands still shaking. Eliza cleaned her rifle with sharp, efficient motions, though the tightness around her eyes betrayed her fear. Miriam stood tall, shotgun still in hand, but her gaze softened as it settled on Caleb. "You saved us," she said simply. Caleb shook his head. "I stood with you. Difference matters." Then Clara moved. She crossed the room and stood before him, her eyes fierce, her hands trembling as they reached for his wounded arm. "You bled for us," she whispered. "You didn't have to, but you did." Caleb tried to pull away, but she held firm, her grip stronger than her frame should have allowed. "You can keep saying you don't belong," Clara said, voice breaking. "But tonight proved you do. This is your place, Caleb Mercer. By this fire. With us." For the first time in years, Caleb had no words. The walls he'd built, the silence, the drifting, the refusal to root, cracked under the weight of her voice, her fire. And when Clara rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his, he didn't resist. The kiss was not soft, not hesitant. It was fierce, desperate, the kind of kiss born of fire and blood and survival. When they parted, the room was silent, the widows watching, the firelight flickering across scarred skin and tear-bright eyes. Caleb finally spoke, his voice low, raw. "Then I'm done drifting." Miriam closed her eyes, relief washing over her features. Naomi smiled through her tears. Eliza muttered something under her breath that might have been approval. And Clara simply leaned against him, her smile fierce, victorious. Outside, the night settled once more. The coyotes howled in the distance, but the ranch stood firm, defended, unbroken. Caleb Mercer, the scarred drifter, the man who had sworn never to belong, had finally found a fire worth staying for. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed that story. Please share it with your friends and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. In the meantime, I have handpicked more stories for you that I think you will enjoy. Have a great day.